Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Hotline 21. This is a live interactive show brought to you by CAN TV and Connections for Abused Women and Their Children. If you would like to speak to us at any time, please call the CAN TV hotline number, which is on your screen. I am Maria Marquez, the Children's Advocate over at the Shelter Program of CAWC. And today I have the extreme pleasure of having Stephanie Love Patterson, the Executive Director of CAWC, join us. So Stephanie, could you go ahead and introduce yourself to our audience?
Sure, Maria. Thank you so much for having me here today. My name is Stephanie Love Patterson, Executive Director at Connections for Abused Women and Their Children, and I'm happy to be here.
I'm happy to have you. Thank you. Today we're just going to talk a bit about CAWC, the history of CAWC, so please feel free to call us at any time and speak to us if you have any questions or comments. So Stephanie, can you start off by giving us a brief history of how CAWC started and how you became a part of the organization?
Absolutely. So CAWC started back in about 40 years ago. Actually, we're celebrating our 40th year anniversary this year. And it was a really neat start in that back in the 70s, when there weren't a whole lot of domestic violence organizations, not a lot of good laws and legislation around keeping victims safe, a group of women kind of sat around a kitchen table and said, you know what, we're tired of being victimized, we're tired of hearing about other women in our community being hurt or harmed in some way, so we've got to do something. And so then those women decided to come up with a 24-hour domestic violence hotline. So at least victims had somewhere to call to access help and to get support and validation and, you know, someone just to believe what was going on. And then shortly after that, the agency opened up Chicago's first 24-hour emergency domestic violence shelter, which we have here today. And then after that, sort of the rest was history. CAWC has a history of being visionaries in terms of the services that we provide. And so we have expanded our shelter, and we have services at 2 hospitals now, and Haymarket Center and in the Humboldt Park area. And I think, well, you asked me more questions about that. I'm sort of overrunning that question. But how I got started with CAWC is that I have been an advocate in the field of violence against women since the early 80s. And it was at that moment that I realized how many women actually were alone and didn't have anybody to reach out to for support and for help and for validation. And so I started out as a volunteer advocate doing sexual assault work at Michael Reese Hospital years ago, and then gradually moved into different places. And then I learned about CAWC during my time at Cook County Hospital, and I fell in love with the mission of ending domestic violence. I am very passionate about the work that CAWC does, and so once there was a job opening as a coordinator at the hospital program at Stroger Hospital now, that's how I sort of got my entree to CAWC.
So much history and experience in this realm, right? Mm-hmm. So you've been working for CAWC for a while now. Mm-hmm. What has been the best background and experience that you have that has facilitated you being in this executive director role?
I think, honestly, being in a position of working as a direct service counselor advocate really helped me to really grasp the information and grasp the whole issue of domestic violence and the various needs and the complexities that come with being a victim of domestic violence. It really helped to provide a good foundation so that as executive director now, mm-hmm. I can pull from my various experiences of sitting across from a woman and understanding what it's like when she comes in and she is bleeding and she's bruised and she's scared and her children maybe, you know, are still with the perpetrator and people haven't been very supportive of her. I can recall on those stories. I know what it's like for victims of domestic violence when they go to domestic violence court and maybe they don't have such a great day at court and they didn't get that order of protection, or the perpetrator was the one who is, getting custody or unsupervised visitation, and the list goes goes on and on and on, so that in my role now as executive director, whether I'm writing grants or I'm talking to potential funders or donors, I can kind of reach back into those bags of experiences and pull out instances to help convince people about, and organizations about why they should support CAWC, whether it's financially or otherwise. Also, just being able to advocate for the organization and for clients legislatively. So, you know, when we're working on things like budgetary issues, like the Illinois State had a budget crisis for the last 2.5 years, I was able to pull from those experiences I mentioned earlier to help advocate and say, this is why we need fair and immediate funding now.
Yeah, thank you for that. And
You're welcome.
talking about that really quick, I'm just going to put on the screen our hotline number. This is a 24-hour hotline that you can call, 773-278-4566. And there will be an advocate on the other line ready to help you if you are in a situation or if you know somebody who is and you are looking for some services. So Stephanie, what is your role as the executive director? What does your day-to-day look like?
Wow, my day-to-day, it really changes. My role in the organization, to answer the first part of your question, is just to provide oversight of the organization, to make sure our programs are in place and that we've got great staff to staff the various positions to do the work that we have. But it's also to be kind of the voice of CAWC. Again, whether it's with legislators, to say, you know, we need this piece of legislation passed, or we need this budget passed, or it may be with funders to say, you know, this is a great organization, and here's all of the reasons why, A through Z, why you need to provide funding to our program and our agency, or why you need to continue to provide funding for the agency. Part of my role involves also talking to the media just to help educate the general public and key stakeholders about the issue of domestic violence, because sometimes it could get lost in some of the other issues that are going on in the world today, and help them to understand the needs of victims of domestic violence, and just to provide that general domestic violence education. So my day-to-day is really interesting. Sometimes I get up and I think I'm going to do A, B, and C, and none of that happens. So some days I get up and I know I'm working on a grant or a report or executing contracts and things like that for some of our grants, and just attending meetings to largely make connections, because the one thing that we know is that our agency can't operate in a vacuum. We have to rely on connections, which is why I love our name, Connections for Abused Women and Their Children. But we rely on partnerships throughout the community to help us do work. And so I'm sitting at tables where maybe there's partners like mental health professionals or substance abuse professionals or the police or some other human service nonprofit organizations, and sometimes profit organizations, to help make those connections so that we can make the things that we do stronger, and also to enhance the work of some of those other organizations. But yeah, there's no real typical day-to-day, which makes the work really interesting and makes the day go by pretty quickly.
Yeah, so one of the questions that I think our viewers may be having is, where does an organization like CAWC get all of its funding? Because we have been an organization that has been here for a while, so how do we continue to get that funding year to year?
That's a great question. So it comes from a lot of sources. It comes from different parts of government, the county and the city and state, and a little bit of federal funding. It comes from individual donors. It comes from, in their generosity, it comes from corporations and foundations who we've been fortunate to receive funding from, and also from some larger events. Like we do a big Sounds of Silence gala that's going to be March 10th, as a matter of fact. And so we have a lot of opportunity for great people to help provide support in that way.
Yeah. So what would you say if somebody's interested in kind of what we do and they want to help out, but they might not have the financial resources to give to us or might not have the time to volunteer? What are ways that they could help out?
That's another great question. So there's so many other ways. I mean, of course, we love the financial donations, but we also look for volunteers. And so we have a pretty robust volunteer core group that comes in and provides services for us, whether it's answering our hotline phone at the shelter, whether it's helping with support groups, both with children and adults. Also, people volunteer. We have an internship program, and so we have master's level interns that come in from various universities and colleges to actually do direct service. I'm proud to say that when interns come in, they actually do real work. It's not just sort of shuffling paper from one side of the room to the next. They do everything that we do. People can also help by doing drives for us in terms of, looking at our wish list and doing coat drives or wish list drives and things like that. I happened to, this past Saturday, be a part of a group, actually a boutique, Essential Elements, out on the south side of Chicago, and they did a wonderful drive for us and let me just sort of set up a table in the store and provide information to some of the customers as they were coming in. Other ways that aren't financial that people can help us is just by learning more about domestic violence, learning about connections for abused women and their children, and spreading the word to other people so that they can learn about us and they can kind of continue to spread the word. And I think one last way I'll say, because there's many others, I could talk about it forever, is board opportunities. We have a really great board of directors and junior board, and so it's wonderful to kind of consider lending your expertise or your time and talents to become a member of our board of directors.
I do want to go ahead and go back to our overhead really quick because our website is on there. If you do want to learn more about what we do, our organization, or if you want to get on our wish list is actually on the website, and we are constantly updating it with things we might need at the shelter or just in general. So Stephanie, what would you say is your biggest challenge working as the executive director, and not only with CAWC but in general in the line of domestic violence? What is the biggest challenge?
I'll answer the second part of your question first. I think just in terms of domestic violence, one of the biggest challenges is just really communicating what domestic violence is and sort of keeping domestic violence on the radar screen for people, for the general public. There's so many things that are out there. Like lately, for instance, community violence and gun violence has kind of taken center stage. And it's not that we're in competition or anything like that, but I think because the way our news cycles kind of go, people focus on what's out in front of them. And one of the challenges that I have as executive director is helping people to see there's a connection to some of the community violence and gun violence out there that leads right back to domestic violence. If you kind of dissect what's going on and some of the people that are involved, you may trace it right back to what people have seen in their homes. So what I mean by that is if you grow up in a household and you witness domestic violence as a child and there's little or no intervention or someone to come in and say this is wrong, you may grow up and think, well, that's how I negotiate matters in my own relationship, and that can fall out onto the playground or out into just, the community and things like that. And so one challenge is sort of keeping domestic violence at the forefront of and on the radars of people's minds so that it doesn't get lost in the shuffle and people, we talked about funding earlier, don't sort of take their funding away from our services and just put it into someplace else. I think another challenge is, just sort of keeping up with the changing needs of the women and children that we serve. The face of domestic violence has changed now from what it used to be when I got started in the field of violence against women, again, back in the 80s. And so abusers are becoming more sophisticated and more clever in some of the ways they choose to establish and maintain power and control. And so it's a challenge kind of helping all of the staff at CAWC to kind of figure out how do we keep up with all of those things so that we're really providing comprehensive services that's meeting the needs of all of those complexities that are out there.
Yeah, and one misconception that I kind of hear a lot is that domestic violence has been going down, or that there's not as high numbers as there used to be. Can you talk a little bit about that, where you think that that's coming from?
You know, that's an interesting point. I think it depends on who you talk to.
Mm-hmm.
I think not all places are capturing statistics around domestic violence as they should. And so if you're not asking about domestic violence, if you're not documenting the fact that there are victims of domestic violence coming into whatever institution or organization, you know, that's out there, then sure, you know, it's going to be, you know, kind of like, oh yeah, we don't see domestic violence here. One of the things that we often tell different institutions when we're trying to sort of get our foot in the door, who tell us no, domestic violence doesn't happen here, is, are you asking about domestic violence? And if they say no, it's like, that's why you think it's not there, because you're not asking. If you ask, you know, people will tell you. If you do it in a sensitive, non-judgmental way, people will tell you, yes, I'm a victim of domestic violence. I think, you know, we certainly are meeting the needs of individuals, but domestic violence definitely is still, unfortunately, a huge part of our society in every community.
So what would you say to someone that in their everyday life who doesn't have the knowledge that we might have,
Mm-hmm.
and knows a friend or a family member, and they suspect that they're going through domestic violence? What are some ways that they could reach that friend or that family member
Mm-hmm.
without having the background that we have?
Sure. Another great question, Maria. I think one of the first things is to educate themselves on what domestic violence is and how to help.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes a family member or friend's first intuition on how to help might not be the best thing. And sometimes it's sort of ringing the alarm bell and go, oh my God, we got to get you out, and you know, you've got to go away. And sometimes when you learn about domestic violence, we can help educate people to take a deep breath and kind of wait and ask her what is it that she wants to do about her relationship. So how do you get educated about domestic violence? Well, one of the ways you mentioned earlier is to go to our website, www.cawc.org. We also are on social media, and we from time to time post different things about how to help family members. But some of the most basic sorts of things I would say is first to believe her. If anybody ever comes to you and they say, I'm a victim of domestic violence, so important to believe her, because the abuser has oftentimes said, nobody's going to believe you. You know, they're going to believe me. They're going to think you're crazy. You can't even get anybody to, you know, to help you. So it's important that we believe her. And also to validate her feelings and validate her experiences. Victims of domestic violence go through so many just outlandish kinds of things that many people oftentimes wouldn't believe. But it's important as a family member or friend to validate and believe her. And then, again, I mentioned it earlier, to ask that question, what would you like to do? Also I can't leave this topic without talking about sort of assessing the safety. You know, asking, are you in immediate danger? You know, are you okay? One of the things we talk about with safety planning, for instance, is for victims and family members or friends to develop like a code word, for instance, where if I'm a victim and you're my, you know, friend, if we happen to be on the phone, you know, I say bluebird and, you know, or apple pie or whatever, and you know that's my code word to say, Stephanie's in trouble. I need to call 911 right away. Mm-hmm. So it's those sorts of things. And then, you know, lastly, I would say, you know, to help them to maybe come up with a safety plan. You can do that by, you know, again, going to our website to get some, you know, ideas about how to create a safety plan, or even just to give them our phone number and say, hey, this is an organization, a great organization, I'll say, that can help you with, you know, a safety plan and to identify resources and options to help increase your safety.
Yeah, and I would say too, going off of that, right, here's our number again. And we do get a lot of calls on the hotline of people who want to help out somebody that they know, and they're asking us, what's the best way to do that, right? So that's one way to gain knowledge about safety planning and how does a safety plan work, but it's also a great number to give to somebody who needs it. And that could be as simple as putting it on a little piece of paper and passing it to them without the abuser noticing them.
It's also really empowering for them sometimes, because some people want to help and they want to do something. And sometimes just a simple thing like giving that, passing that number is just the help that they need, and they can feel empowered to call and access help for themselves. I just wanted to throw that in.
Thank you. So I want to talk a little bit about our rally that we have this upcoming Sunday. Can you talk about the history of the rally and how that is going to look like? I will put up on the overhead some information on it while you are just talking about that.
Sure. So our march and rally, Silent Too Long, Silent No More, is coming up Sunday, October 29th from 11 to 1, as it says on the screen. We'll start at Roberto Clemente High School. The history behind the, and we will march to the 14th District at 2150 North California Avenue, and you can get more information again from our website. The history behind it is just wanting to make a noise, as loud a noise as possible within the community about domestic violence. We go through, where there's lots of houses and, moms and children that come out, and people from stores, store owners and everything, to see what's going on so that we can help bring attention to the issue of domestic violence. And our services, and as I mentioned earlier, keep it on the radar screen, and hopefully to help individuals to reach out for help.
We do, we will come back to this, but we have a caller on the line, so caller, please go ahead.
Hello.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi. I just turned about 15 minutes ago to your program, and I'm not sure if you mentioned, or most of the time you don't hear it mentioned, and if the abused woman does not get work with maybe a social worker or psychologist to deal with the issues, that she could become the perpetrator.
Well, thank you for that question. Very rarely do I see that happens. Actually, I think that, perpetrators of domestic violence usually have an innate desire to establish and maintain power and control. That's the core root of domestic violence and why people choose to abuse their partners. Whereas on the other side, a victim of domestic violence, or someone who isn't a perpetrator of domestic violence, doesn't really have that desire to have establish and maintain that power and control. So I don't think there's a whole lot of data out there, and certainly in the work that I've done over the number of years, that suggests that actually happens.
Okay.
Thank you, caller.
I appreciate your comment on it. I'm a witness and a victim of the domestic violence. So it does happen. Maybe it's not been in the forefront like domestic violence wasn't, but it can, and I've seen it happen to more than one person.
Okay, yeah, there's lots of different experiences that are out there. Thank you for calling.
Thank you. So just really quick, because I think we are out of time. Again, our rally is this Sunday, October 29th at 11 a.m. and we are going to start off at the Roberto Clemente High School on Western and Division, and all you have to do is show up and march with us and walk with us and just have your presence heard along with us. So thank you so much, Stephanie, for being my guest today.
Thank you.
And thank you, viewers, for watching us today. We come on the fourth Tuesday of every month, so we will be here again next month with a new topic and a new guest. Thank you.
Thank you.